Hey guys, thanks for jumping on here. It's Kristen Cooper, your mortgage gal. Wanted to jump on here and walk through, should I continue to rent or should I buy? It's one of the biggest questions that I get from my clients every day, and it's one of the questions that I get that I love answering. And the reason why is I think that there's just a lack of information in order for, home buyers to make educated decisions. So we're going to talk through a lot of information today to show you a high overview perspective of renting versus owning. But of course, reach out to me so that we can run your specific numbers and see if it makes sense for you. So today what we're going to be looking at is we're just going to say Mr. Home Buyer. And so Mr. Home Buyer is paying rent right now for $3,000 a month, and he's considering, should I buy? Should I wait until rates drop? Should I continue saving? Does it make sense to buy? And so we're going to look at that. So what you see in the first column is just that. So we're paying $3,000 a month for rent. But what if we buy a home and we're looking at, let's say, $600,000? So if we buy a home at $600,000, we're assuming just say 10% down. But again, if you're putting more or less, we can look at those options for you. And that means that we're looking at today, we'll just say a rate of 7.5%. Now, of course, every interest rate is going to be different based on your specific options. I'm a broker, which means we shop over 80 different lenders. You're going to get the best rates and pricing, but it is subject to change each day. So just let me know and we can run numbers for you. But just for comparisons today, that's what we're looking at. The total payment that we're looking at roughly is about $45.58. Now, this $45.58 includes your principal and interest, which is your 30-year mortgage, meaning you make that payment for 30 years, it pays off your loan, and the interest, which is the cost for borrowing the money to the lender, and then as well as your property taxes and homeowners insurance and mortgage insurance that's required when you put less than 20% down. So that would be your total payment that you'd be looking at paying. Of course, it doesn't include water, electricity, any of that, but your actual mortgage payment, including taxes and insurance. What we need to look at too is what is your tax benefit? Now, there are some limitations around tax benefits, so we do need to look at your specific options. And what I mean by that is there's what's called a standard deduction. So whether you rent or whether you own, you get that standard deduction. And then beyond that, if it's above the interest deduction write-offs is beyond that, then you could take an additional deduction. California will also allow that you write off the mortgage interest deduction. So you will have that tax benefit. So that's what we're looking at here today. So this is based on head of household, 2 people that are filing with their income over $90,000, and what we're looking at what tax benefit would be. Now, why this is important, this is something that's really missed when you're making a decision of investing into a home, is that you really need to take all factors. Now, this tax benefit, if you are getting an $844.72 tax benefit a month, what that means is that annualized, so we take that $844.72 times 12, that means when you go file your taxes, that's how much of a tax savings you're getting in this scenario based on how much you're going to save with the interest deduction that you get for owning a home versus if you didn't. So if you get $844 for that tax savings, that's something you have to consider as far as your overall budget. So maybe you reduce what you're claiming on your, with your employer as far as what they're collecting for taxes. So you save more each month that you can afford the mortgage payment because you're putting it into that payment, or you just get a bigger return at the end of the year. Either way, that's money that you have to consider in cost versus benefit. Now you'll notice here in the rent, the tax benefit's $518. That's because, again, whether you're renting or owning based on how the tax law is today, you're still going to get a standard deduction. In this scenario, they would get a $518 deduction for the taxes based on the standard deduction. But owning a home, as you can see, is going to be higher. So that you would get $844. So the difference between that $518 to the $844 is additional monthly savings, which now you can convert and use towards the mortgage payment. So if you're renting at $3,000, just that difference alone is going to be how much money you're going to have that you can afford a higher mortgage. Now you got to take it a step further and say, okay, well, I get that. I'm going to get additional tax savings. That's great. I can change my deductions, get more money. Now I can afford to pay more than what I'm paying for rent. Why would it still make sense for you to purchase a home beyond that? So let's look at principal paid. What I like calling principal paid is forced savings. And the reason I like calling it forced savings is you're kind of forced to save, right? So each month you have a mortgage payment. So in this option we're looking at $45.58, you're going to have to continue to pay that $45.58 every month, but $476 of it now goes into your equity. That's called a principal payment. So part of your payment, your principal and interest, the principal part is paying down your loan balance. So each month that you make that $45.58, $476, the principal, comes down in your loan balance, which is your equity. So it's savings in the home that you have, meaning if you sell the home, that's your equity, which then would be converted into money that you would get when you sell the home. So it's your savings in the home. So on top of the tax benefit savings, you now are getting a return just if you kept the loan as it is, meaning you bought it for $600,000. That's what the value stayed at. $400 every month is how much you are paying down in the principal that's now your savings. So even though you're making the payment, you're just shifting where your savings is going, whether it be your bank account or now in your home, which is called your equity. So that's an additional savings that you have to consider. So when we look at your net payment, that's really where we're considering rent versus owning. So even though your payment's $45.58, meaning you have to make that payment each month, after your tax benefit, after your principal paid, your actual payment is $33.12. Now, your net payment is just for comparison, saying that after you take your tax benefit, after the principal that's your savings, it's just shifting where we're putting your money, your payment for payment in comparisons of rent versus owning would be $33.12. Now, let's be fair and let's be transparent in the fact that if you're paying $3,000 for rent, you still get a tax benefit, which means now your net payment on rent is $24.82. So that's being reduced too. But now you can compare and say, okay, the after benefit, whether tax or principal, is applied to rent or owning. Now my payment was $24.82 with rent versus $33.12. So you do have an increase in payment, and that's because you're now investing into something that's giving you a rate of return. So oftentimes people say, I really want to keep my rent around what my payment's going to be, for my mortgage. But let me ask you this, where can you invest and get a return, which we're going to talk about, without paying more? It just doesn't exist. And the reason why is that you have to look and consider, what is the return that I'm getting for this investment, which is the bigger question. And the reason that we look at this is we say, okay, if we have, and you can see here your tax benefit. So just over 5 years renting, you have a tax benefit of roughly $31,000 versus if you own a home, now you can see you have a huge, a much larger tax benefit that you would have. But what does that mean in 15 years? So in 15 years, if you rent, you have no return, correct? Like you don't get anything from that. If anything, it's just, continued rent prices. And what we're looking at when we look at these numbers is just assuming a 5% rent increase year over year, which actually it's shown that it's more. But you could see here in 15 years, if you were to purchase this home, that extra investment that you're making, right at the end of the day, this versus this, that you're paying more, in 15 years is going to give you a rate of return of, over $840,000, assuming just a standard 4% appreciation rate, which is actually going to be more. We're already on track over 6% appreciation rate this year on homes. And when rates go down, guess what? That appreciation number goes more like 8 to 10% is how much your home's going to go up year over year because you have more buyers in the market driving up prices. So this is being very conservative. So if I were to ask you then, now that you look at the numbers and you say, hey, Kristen, I see that I'm going to have to pay, an extra $800, $900 more a month. Is it worth it? Well, let me ask you, would you be willing to pay $800 more a month to be able to earn that much in 15 years as a net worth? This is how people retire. This is how people strategize for building their net worth. This is one pillar that you definitely want to have. Now you can go even deeper into real estate investing, and we can look at those scenarios too and talk how you can even multiply it even more and faster and quicker when you start building in more into your portfolio. But if you don't even own a home yet, there's no other way that you could save your way into it. Even if you took that $800 a month and you invested it somewhere, you got to consider compound interest. And what does that mean? Well, that means that if you take that $800 and you start investing that today, how long is it going to take you to get this rate of return? And you're not going to meet it by that. And you also already need housing, right? So you're already taking care of that within the same scenario. So I think it's really important that you look at all these options when you're looking at, does it make sense for me to rent versus owning? And that's just saying based on where we are today. But let's take it a step further. Right now, interest rates are a little bit more elevated than what people would like, right? We came from very low rates during COVID to where we are today, which is actually really not that bad. But when you go from those numbers to these numbers in such a short span, it appears that it's so much higher. But we do know that rates are coming down. And how do we know that? It's all based on data. I'm not saying rates are coming down just to tell you rates are coming down. But if you look at inflation has been high, which the Feds have been meeting, and you've probably heard about this all over the media. That's their number one focus right now. The Fed's number one focus is getting inflation to come down. And when that's their number one focus, That's going to tell us what's going to happen with the rate market, because inflation follows mortgage, or mortgage rates follow inflation. So when inflation is high, every single time, you can go back and look at the history, and you could Google how do mortgage interest rates and inflation work together. And when you see inflation high, rates are high. When you see inflation low, rates come down. So we know that the feds have already said inflation will come down. We will do whatever it takes to get inflation to come down. So when inflation comes down, that means interest rates are going to come down. So if you buy today, you can in the future get a lower interest rate when interest rates drop, which is called a refinance. What that means is that we pay off your current loan, give you a new loan with new terms, and we're going to talk about different strategies, how you can save even more in those opportunities down the road. Or you could say, you know what, Kristen, I'm going to go ahead and wait a year or two until rates come down because I want my payment to be affordable. What does that look like? Well, like I just said, when interest rates come down, there's more buyers that go into the market. And when there's more buyers that go into the market, when we have low inventory, which we're at an all-time low inventory, and that's not going to, develop more listings quickly. You can't build fast enough to make up the shortage for inventory. So when you have low interest rates, more buyers in the market, right? Because now more people can afford. And then we're back to where it was when rates were low, where you have 20, 30 offers on a property. And now that interest rate is low, your payment's lower in that specific moment. However, it drives the price up. So this same home that you had at $600,000 now is going to be worth $660,000, assuming a 10% increase, which is fair when rates drop. Well, now you pay $660,000, which means now your down payment's higher. And let's say, yeah, we got you down to 5.25 for the rate, which is great. Your payment's less than what it would have been, if interest rates were 7.5. But it now does require more funds from you at closing, right? Now your closing costs or your cash to close is going to go up because your down payment goes up. And yeah, sure, you saved a little bit on your payment here, but you paid more for the home. So what does that mean? Why is this not necessarily a great thing? Well, you got to take into account a couple of factors. A, you're paying more for the home, which means now you're going to owe more. Your loan balance is higher, right? So instead of it being 540, now your loan balance is 594. So now you owe more, which is going to impact your net worth, right? Assets versus liability. But also, if you wait 2 years and you're paying $3,000 a month, how much did you just waste in rent? So not only, if we're looking at that, that's what, $36,000 a year that you're wasting in rent. So if you wait a year, not only are you paying $60,000 more for the home, but you also just wasted. So it's even that much more of a spread. But what if you're able to buy today? So if you're able to buy today, and we look at the first option here, and we look at your actual payment, right? It's the $4,558. You got the home for $600. Awesome. Your loan balance is $540,000. Great. So what does that look like? Well, that means in the future, when interest rates come down and we're able to get you a lower rate, and let's just use that same rate, 5.25, you now potentially can lower your payment to $36.34. So you bought the house cheaper, which means you owe less. And in the future, when rates drop, you get to lower and restructure that payment. So you win-win. You won the lower price and you won the lower rate. It just means that you're going to have to make up the difference. And if it's, $900 for a year or two to save you $90,000, $100,000, is it worth it? That's why a lot of people today that don't get the right information, they're waiting, and then they buy in a couple years. And if they get the right information, they, then talk to somebody that's given them the information, they're super disappointed because they just lost out on a huge opportunity for them to be able to earn so much equity and build more wealth in this environment. So it's a pretty big impact when you start looking at the overall structure of everything here. And then when you start looking at the net worth and the compound effect of it, you definitely could see that if you can afford to purchase in today's market, why it does benefit you, why it makes sense for you to purchase a home versus continuing to rent. Now, if you're paying $500 for a room for rent, then let's run the numbers because you're going to have a different outcome. And we want to see, benefit versus the cost. So we run those numbers and see if it makes sense for you, because I don't think that it makes sense for everybody to buy in this market. If somebody's looking to buy and sell in 2 years, shouldn't buy. I'd continue to rent unless you plan on keeping that property and renting it out. And then we need to consider, are you going to be refinancing in the future? Is it going to be your primary? There's different questions. So every scenario is different. But the important thing to know is that you're working with somebody that's giving you all the mortgage options, the mortgage strategies that are going to save you the most money, and be able to explain it to you so that you know what decisions you're making and that you see that huge benefit for you and your family and the opportunity to build so much wealth during these times. So please reach out to me. I'd love to go over these options with you and give you specific numbers for your scenario. And let's strategize and figure out, is it right for you to buy today? And if it's not, let's create a plan so that you're in the best position possible for when interest rates do come down. Because when rates come down, if you're a buyer in the market, it's going to be a lot more challenging for you to get your offer accepted. So we need to make sure that you're in the right space and that you are in the best position possible to help get your offer accepted. So I can go over that with you as well. Even if it's not today that you're buying, even if it's going to be a little bit of time, let's create that home buying plan for you.